Last night I saw my most anticipated movie of the year, Superman. I grew up in the 80s. The only superhero movies I had were the Superman films, so they always have a special place in my heart. And with this new one, gotta say, while I'm talking, be sure to join me down below in the comments section. Let me know your excitement level for the film. If you've seen it, what did you think about it? Also, tune in to the end of this video. I did ask people coming out of the theater what they thought about it. So not just my opinion, but the opinion of many other people, as well as my 13-year-old son. And let's get started with the good. As I said, this was my most anticipated movie of the year, and I gotta say, I left the theater with a big grin on my face. This is possibly the most comic booky, live-action comic book film that we've ever gotten. And what I mean by that is that it's just this big, pre-populated world of wild comic book stuff, whether you're talking about other heroes, kind of wacky sci-fi. Comparison a lot of people will probably be making is that it's like an episode of Justice League Unlimited brought to live action. It just feels like it's not trying to ground it in our reality. It's not trying to be gritty or anything like that. It's a comic book translated into live action. And when you read a comic book, it drops you right in the middle of the action. It's a world that is filled with all of this different stuff. That's what this feels like. The movie kicks off and we're right in the middle of the action. We're like literally in the middle of a battle sequence of sorts, and we just kind of take off from there, and it never really slows down. The world is already established, and we're joining in, learning about it on this adventure with Superman. It's not an origin story. It's not trying to set up the rules. The world is not shocked and amazed that Superman exists and that super-powered people are there. No. It already exists. They're used to it. We're the one visiting their comic book world and reality. And there's something about that that is very refreshing, where either it's an origin story for a superhero, we're introducing a world slowly throughout a series of different characters. That's what they normally do when establishing a new universe. And here, from the get-go, it makes it clear. No, in this world that we're building out, this is the norm. Wild, sensational things happen regularly. Of course, it's a Superman movie, so we should probably talk about Superman. And this is a very hopeful Superman. He's a Superman that loves helping people and defines himself based off this purpose to make the world a better place. Into some silly ways, some little things that he does in the action sequences that either will put a smile on your face or make you roll your eyes a little bit. But at the core of it, it's a Superman that is just passionate about saving lives and truly defines himself around that concept, which even will kind of lead into some of the other things about the movie and the conflict in the film. I will say this on a more negative side with him. This, I don't want to bring this up entirely in the negative section because I liked this portrayal of Superman. He is very shouty, and even you see this in the trailers of him getting in an argument.
People were going to die.
There's a little bit too much of him, losing his cool in these discussions when he's challenged on things. And I don't know that I needed this shouty version of him. I don't know if that's just a James Gunn thing that he likes characters and his protagonists to be like that, but I didn't necessarily need that. But David Cornsweet's version of the character, outside of the being too shouty, just feels like this wholesome version of Superman. He's not angsty at all. Like there's a burden on his shoulders. He goes through a lot in the film and he's like struggling greatly. But even in the discussions between the differences between him and Lois, it's all goes back to like this lack of cynicism, a hopefulness. Even some of a good bit of the trouble that he faces in the movie is because he's so trusting and believes the best and comes from this mindset. And it's kind of this recurring theme in the movie is that he is just so much believes in the best in people and the world around him. and that gets him into trouble. And I love that about him. He's also, while he's the most powerful metahuman in this universe, and it kind of establishes that very clearly from the beginning, he's also a more vulnerable Superman. All throughout the movie, he gets the crap kicked out of him in a variety of different ways. Like, he's like really dragged through it in this film. They find a way to take the guy that's supposed to be able to win every fight and make him constantly have to just keep pushing forward, and turns him into that underdog throughout the entire film. There's the struggles that he faces to try and overcome all of this. And kind of even to that point, the movie has a very different type of conflict inside of it for Superman to overcome. Like, it's him versus Lex Luthor, but being the mastermind, manipulating things, working behind the scenes. He's got his master plan that Superman doesn't even realize he is in the middle of this conspiracy. And that's even kind of where the news side of things ties into it, of trying to unravel everything that Lex Luthor is up to. But the way that he's challenged isn't just, how do I win this fight? It's not just, there's a big threat over there, I have to be able to beat that monster, I have to be able to beat that metahuman over there. He's challenged in ways that kind of like break down his understanding of himself, his identity, his relationship with the world. And there's a number of things that are in the trailers that are kind of portrayed, and the way that when you just see them without context is like, are we just doing Batman v Superman again? Are we just kind of doing the same sort of, do we need a Superman sort of situation? But that's not really the way it plays out in the movie. It plays out very differently, and it's part of some grander plan of what's kind of going on, and it makes more sense. Speaking of things that kind of played better in the movie than they did in some of the marketing, Crypto is quite adorable. I pretty infamously, whenever they put out some of the first images of Crypto, I was like, I don't know, is this the right direction to go of like the dog? If you're trying to go to the masses, will the dog sell people? But in a movie that is very comic booky, like the world, the realm that this film exists in, the dog fits perfectly. The dog makes sense because it's just this comic book world that has all these fantastical elements, that it's not embarrassed of silly things. And so it can get away with stuff that if you do the exact same thing in Man of Steel 2, would be like, what's going on here? A dog with a cape. This is just a world where that plays. It works. It makes sense. And so Crypto's quite adorable. He's extraordinarily frustrating, as most dogs are. And even it's just kind of like a little element inside the story of a connection point for something that's so frustrating for Superman, as well as so comforting and means so much to him. That's like the most relatable thing in the film, as my own dog right now is driving me crazy with his inability to understand where he's supposed to go to the bathroom. Today's video is brought to you by Audible. If you like to read with your ears, not your eyes, consider joining over on Audible. I've been a member at Audible for 9 years and 11 months to the day. I am literally 1 month away from my 10-year anniversary being a member of Audible. And you can get a free 30-day trial and a free book of your choice by signing up for a free trial of Audible at audibletrial.com/Sean Chandler. There's actually a tie-in book that they put out just a couple weeks ago that is a prequel to Superman, that's about when Superman first arrives in Metropolis and Clark Kent first arrives at the Daily Planet and meets everybody. I'm about 2/3 of the way through the book. So it's just kind of an introduction to all the characters, a bit of the origin story for him in Metropolis. So if you're interested in that, you can get it for free at audibletrial.com/Sean Chandler. That's a free 30-day trial, a free audiobook of your choice. The link is down below in the description. The cast all around, I thought, did a nice job. Everyone fit their roles. There wasn't like a weak link in the chain or anything like that. One of the unexpected ones to me was Ma and Pa Kent, where at first I felt like they did feel a little out of place because almost everyone else was a much more familiar face, flashier casting. And then Ma and Pa Kent felt very kind of grounded, small, like much less familiar faces. And that exact element is what I think made them work. They play much more like just normal people. They were the anchors. Metropolis is big and flashy and cartoonish and filled with wild sci-fi. And then we go back to Smallville, and they feel like people that you actually know, not movie characters. Everything else is flashy, but the people that raised the greatest metahuman on the planet feel like people that you know. And so the fact that they weren't big flashy actors is almost the exact thing that gives the movie its roots in some sort of relatable reality. And just kind of the final one, is pretty action-packed. We start in the middle of a battle and then it never really lets up. There's actually very little Clark Kent in the movie. Like it's Superman centric. And even some of the stuff that is, him dressed like Clark Kent is still him as Superman. There's very little of the identity of very little Clark Kent in the movie, which is almost kind of fascinating the way that it played out. But that's also to say that we're just on this adventure, this roller coaster ride from beginning to end of what Lex is up to in this bigger, grander conspiracy of stuff going on. So for me, as someone that loves Superman, this is a very different type of Superman movie. It's very uplifting. It's very comic booky, and it put a big, gigantic grin on my face. There are a few more things to talk about, so let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. When it comes to the mixed aspects of this film, the big thing that comes to mind for me was Lex Luthor. There's certain things about him that I kind of loved, and there were some other things that I felt pretty underdeveloped. Not a performance thing. Nicholas Hoult, I think, did a great job with the material that he was given. And in particular, this is the most hateable Lex Luthor that we have ever gotten. Of all the renditions, the way that he's played out, this version almost immediately is just despicable. And you cannot wait to see him defeated. So in that regard, he's a great villain. His treatment of humanity, the obvious contradictions, and all of it is just infuriating. So by the time you get to the third act of this movie, you just cannot wait for this guy to get destroyed by Superman. And everyone that's aiding and abetting, everyone that's helping him, you can't stand their faces. In that regard, once again, they've established a great villain. And you're like, this guy, what are we going to do to stop him? Thus leading to some really nice payoff when certain things happen, but also feels one-dimensional. It doesn't feel like we ever kind of get underneath the surface too much. There's a basic idea of he's jealous. There's a basic idea of him threatened by metahumans, but it never feels like a fleshed out human with well-rounded thoughts. And combined with the fact of he's surrounded by a team of people that it's not obvious why any of them are doing what he's telling them to do. There's kind of I guess James Gunn kind of likes control rooms. In a lot of his movies, there's a control room full of people at knobs doing stuff and excited about what's happening or whatever. And that happens again in this movie. It's not remotely obvious why any of these people are so on board with Lex Luthor's plans and the consequences. In particular, in the third act, you're like, why are you guys okay with this? Why are you continuing down this path? The villains are hateable, like someone that you want to be defeated, so it's satisfying when that happens. There is a side, though, where you're like, hey, wait a minute. But they're just mustache-twirling evil, aha, I'm envious, haha, stop the metahumans. And there's not much more to it than that. Other thing to talk about, not a good or a bad, just something that people always ask with these movies. Does Superman have a mid or post-credit scene? Yes, there are two of them. There's one in the middle of the credits, and then there's one all the way at the end. Neither one of them are some earth-shattering tease of a future thing. Both of them are just kind of fun little scenes that put a smile on your face. If you desperately need to run to the bathroom, you are not missing out on anything if you decide not to stay to the very end for the bit, because it's not some big payoff. It's not some big gigantic tease that you're like, wow, that's not what this is. It's just cute humor post-credit scenes. From there, let's move on to the bad. And like I said, I left the movie with a big, gigantic grin on my face. There's so much about this movie that I thoroughly enjoyed. Very positive on the movie. There were a few things that it was just kind of like, I don't know, maybe that could have been a little bit better. The first thing that comes to mind is a bit of a counterbalance to something I said earlier, that it's a very comic booky movie, that it just feels like Justice League Unlimited brought to life. There's a counterbalance to that of being in this populated world, that as soon as you see live action, real humans in a city with this much destruction taking place, it doesn't play the same. Because you're like, why would anyone live in this city? The spectacular becomes commonplace. Horrific becomes just a daily occurrence that people don't care about. And so the impact of these catastrophes is minimalized because the characters in the movie don't seem to care all that much about it. Like, the kaiju that's you see in the trailer, there's like still people out on the street like eating ice cream and stuff like that. They're not running from it. And that kind of, when you create a world, your world building involves a scenario where people are just like, hey, look, a kaiju. Let me eat my ice cream. You diminish the effect of things. There's an inflation of spectacle, so much so in your world that the most spectacular things imaginable have no impact. And that's a little bit what kind of happens with this movie, that it just goes so big that big becomes totally commonplace. And you have a movie that has enormous stakes in the one sense, but it never really feels epic. It never feels as big as it should because it treats tremendous events as daily events. Instead of feeling epic, it feels episodic. And episodic doesn't mean bad, but it doesn't have as much of an oomph, as much of an impact as it should in light of how big the events of this movie actually are. I think Syndrome put it best.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
Other one that kind of comes to mind here, it is pretty exposition heavy and there's a lot of kind of clunky dialogue that James Gunn makes it fun at times and funny, but there's a lot of characters pausing to say their emotions. And then some of the CGI and action can be a little bit cartoonish. You can see that a little bit in the trailers. And, some of the flying stuff didn't really bother me, but when you get into some of the action, there's a sequence in another realm, without wanting to say too much, involving a small character without wanting to say too much. And it just got very cartoonish. And that's not what I would have done. So wasn't necessarily fully crazy about how all the action was done. In the scheme of things, like I said, I left with a big grin on my face, thoroughly enjoyed the movie, had a good time with it. I can see a scenario where there's going to be a fair number of people who will just think it's a little bit too silly, a little bit too goofy. That won't surprise me. That didn't bother me too much. Here's what the people at my theater were saying. We just got out of seeing Superman. What'd you think?
I'm kind of young, but I think that was the best Superman movie I've ever seen.
I enjoyed the film. It's very good as far as it's definitely a comic book film.
I loved it. I think this is one of those movies that if you're a Superman fan, you will be so happy.
I mean, I would say that's my Superman. That was very comic book forward Superman, and that is what I've been wanting out of a Superman movie for a while.
This is the DC movie that I have been wanting for years. This is Superman ripped straight out of the comic books.
I really like how at the start of the movie it gets straight to the point. There's no Superman origin, it just gets straight to the point.
I think there's a lot of exposition in it. I think all the actors did a phenomenal job nailing every single role they were given.
Great casting. The casting was like perfect. Like these actors, found their inner Superman, Lois Lane, Lex Luthor, and they ran for us.
Casting and acting, I think it's great.
All of the actors embodied their characters to an absolute T. David Cornswet, there's an interview scene in this film where I was like, that is Clark Kent.
Like, look, if y'all diehard Superman fans, James Gunn gives you what you want. Look, I know the old Zack Snyder movie, he didn't write Superman right. This is how you write Superman.
Definitely some places that's a little corny at times, but that's what you get when you get a Superman movie.
There's small things that you could take away, like,
I don't know if it'll make $1 billion. I don't know, but I hope it does. And if you are a DC fan, if you have been wanting a very whimsical, comic booky Superman DC universe, this is the movie to go see.
The script is great. I think they got the script really well.
God, I loved it.
It is phenomenal.
Overall, I think it's a really good movie.
And even though I was like a little trepidatious about it, it's a great movie.
Absolutely love this film.
Real quick, before I give you my final thoughts, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Let me know, what's your excitement level? If you've seen it, what did you think about it? Also, I've done a number of Superman reviews in the past. Just a couple weeks ago, reviewed Superman 78, talked about Superman and Lois, a number of other things. You can check that down below. Also, come back this weekend. We're going to have a spoiler review, Superman movies ranked, and more. If you love Superman, if you want to talk about Superman, it is coming this weekend. This was my most anticipated movie of the year, and I left having had my expectations met. Do I think it's one of the greatest comic book movies of all time? No. But did I get a fresh new take on Superman that I really enjoyed? Yes, I did. And if you're not like me and just totally biased towards Superman 1978, this is going to be a lot of people's favorite Superman movie of all time. Overall, it's an A- on the entertainment scale and 8.5 out of 10. And go see this movie. It's worth seeing on the biggest screen possible and make up your own mind. Do you enjoy this comic booky, cartoonish flavor? Check out those other videos somewhere around here and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.